everybody. Today I'm going to give you an example of why using proper semantic HTML is important in terms of ensuring that relationship is well defined in tables for individuals using accessible technology or assistive technology. So today I'm going to be showing you my certifications and badges table that I have. And I'm going to have three different versions. This first version is a well-made one, and I'll show you why here in a little bit. Then I have another one that does not have the TH tags in order to define which cells are considered table headers. And then I have a third version, and this version has the table headers, but it doesn't have additional IDs and header attributes to help define scope. And for showing all this, I'm going to be using Andy. Andy is an open source tool created by the Social Security Administration. It's just a little browser applet. You'll notice when I hover over it, it just has that nice little JavaScript text. And you can, if you want to try this with Andy, if you want to try using it, all you have to do is if you just search for SSA Andy, it should be more than likely the very first search result that comes up. You'll notice it'll be at an ssa.gov link. The URL for that is ssa.gov/accessibility/Andy. And all you have to do is you'll just go there, and I can't do it since I already have it. You'll just click here, and you'll see it's got information here on exactly how to do it. You'll just click and drag that up to your browser bookmark bar, and it should just work as is. Now, I'll just click on Andy here. I'll have to scroll back down since it kind of refreshes the page a little. But once I have Andy open, it gives me a little drop down that lets me select modules based on what things I'm wanting to inspect. And in this case, I'm going to select tables. And I've got some additional information here, but basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to hover over different cells in the table to help show visually how the IDs and header attributes and the TH tags, how all of that impacts how assistive technology recognizes the table and how it identifies the relationship between information in various cells to give the user context. So now you'll notice when I hover over this first certification, my Accessibility in Action badge from Microsoft, you'll notice that it also highlights the header, the column header that's just above that, and it also kind of highlights the rest of the row to show that that relationship is there. And that's because I have IDs to identify the various rows, and I also have IDs for the individual column headers, and I've set those as headers for each cell in the row, so that way whenever you're over any one particular cell, it knows, okay, this is the column header that is relevant, this is the row header, if applicable, that is relevant to this cell. So in this case, you'll notice that there's that Andy output, and Andy output kind of gives you an idea of if assistive technology looked at this, how is it going to read this off to the user? How is it going to give the user context? And in this case, I have Accessibility in Action. I know that that is the certification title header that it's under. And I can go through it, and as I go down the cells in this particular row, it's going to highlight the different column headers to help give the context of what column header information is being provided, but also it's going to list that Accessibility in Action badge row header so that way the user knows this is still relevant to the accessibility and action badge. It's just now, for instance, now I'm on the expiration date, which is listed as not applicable. This is particularly important when you have moments like this link here where I have verify on Credly. If I just had verify on Credly there and there wasn't the additional context, the user's just going to see that link and they're not going to know, well, what am I verifying on Credly? Versus in this case, because I have the proper IDs and headers set, it's able to identify verify on Credly as being for the accessibility and action badge, and that this is the verification information for that badge. And similarly, if I go down to any of the other rows, you'll notice that because the row ID changes, it identifies the proper rows, column headers. Even though right now I can't see the column header, it's telling me what each one of these cells are. And if you think about it, for a user who is using assistive technology, and depending on how their assistive technology is reading this off, this is going to make it so much easier for them. If things are properly identified, it's going to make it easier for them to maintain context as they scroll down the page, since they're going to potentially have a harder time, especially if as this table gets longer and longer, they're going to have a harder time going back up here and being able to identify the particular column header that they're under. Okay, now we're going to go over to the table that doesn't have the THs, which, first off, you'll notice, of course, because there's no THs used, the formatting, because I don't have any other like CSS or anything set, there's no visual formatting here to help identify headers and for the rows and headers for the columns. Now, there is an instance in which this would be perfectly fine. If this was what is known as a presentation table, and a presentation table is just a table that is meant to organize pictures or content on a page for visual effect. There's no actual specific relationship between one cell and another. In that case, for the table, you could set ARIA role to presentation. This would be identified as a presentation table, and then it wouldn't matter that you didn't have TH tags, because there really wouldn't be any headers at that point. But in this case, this is what's known as a data table, because there is a specific relationship between the cells that needs to be identified and communicated to the user. And so in this case, it is important that you use TH tags. So you'll notice now when I hover over the individual cells, there is no context given. It's just going to read off what's in that specific cell, and it's not going to give off any additional context information that would let the user know that, for instance, this verify on Credly link is specifically linked to my AZ900 certification, or this verify on Credly is specifically related to my diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace certificate. Instead, the user would just get verify on Credly listed and have no idea what the relevance of that link is. Now on this next one, this is the one that has the THs, so it gets the visual effect of what the different headers are. But visual versus like how assistive technology like a screen reader will recognize it can be two different things. TH tags are only going to help insofar. There's going to be certain circumstances where you need more context. So in this case, particularly with this table, because in this table we have row headers and column headers, and in particular, we have an intersection of TH tags where the certification title column header is, is also where the th tags for the individual rows are. Now in this case, because we don't have IDs or headers set up, when I hover over accessibility in action, it doesn't realize that this th is actually relevant to this th. And so because it doesn't have that additional information there, when I hover over that, it's not going to read certification title, accessibility in action badge. Instead, it's just going to read accessibility in action. Now, because when I go further over, because there's not an intersection of THs here, it does properly recognize in this regard that the date issued is relevant to the date issued column header and the accessibility in action badge row header. But again, you go back to the actual badge, and because it's an intersection of THs, it doesn't quite know what to do with that without the additional scope information. And to kind of give you a visual of what I mean when I say like there's that scope information, I'm going to go back to the good table. Here I can turn on markup, and you'll notice that it actually shows me that there's, for instance, for the certification title column header, there's an ID of title col set, and there's a similar ID set for the other column headers. Then when I go down to the cells below that, there's a header attribute, and in that header attribute, I have what the row is, but then I also have that title col, or whatever the respective ID for the column header is, so that way it knows that this cell is related to those two particular IDs. So in this case, it's relevant to the title column and the fact that this is the first row. And that row ID helps also with just making sure that everything along this row is properly related to one another for the screen readers, or other assistive technology for that matter. And that is how semantic HTML helps to provide additional relationship context in tables.